Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mavens of Data. We've got a great show for you today. We have Luke and Kelly here today. Most of you in the audience probably know who they are already. Why you're here. We've got really good attendance already, which is fantastic. But I'd still love for maybe the folks that don't know who you are to get a little quick background. Luke, you want to start off? Just do hello, and this is who I am for the folks here.
Quick background on me: served in the United States Navy, was in the submarine force for 7 years, got out of the Navy and worked as a basically data analyst for a chemical company. And a lot of people would come up to me and ask me, like, how do you use Excel? How do you use Power BI? How do you use this? And I wanted to automate it, so I started making videos on YouTube to get it. Basically, just like any nerd, I'm trying to automate anything I do. And anyway, blew into my YouTube channel, and I was able to, a few years ago, leave my full-time data analyst job and focus on making data analytics content.
So cool. It's awesome. Thanks, Luke, and thanks for being here with us today. Kelly, would you mind doing the same? Just say hello to the audience, tell them a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, so right now I'm a full-time data analyst at a startup. So it's a social casino online gaming company. It's all online. But before that, I was a paralegal for about 3 years, and I made the transition in July of 2023 after really struggling to find a job for the longest time. But when I was job searching, I just wanted to kind of share my journey and then explain what I was doing. Hopefully other people could learn from it. And then once I got the job, I continued posting because I didn't see a lot of content on what it's like actually having the job. So I still post and just say, oh, this is what it's like. So that's kind of what my content is right now.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Kelly. And it's really cool to actually get to be here live with you guys. I've seen you both out there doing what you do, putting so much good content out there for the data community. So really, really fun. And thank you for all that. Here are some of the topics that we're going to get to cover in the show. We won't necessarily go linearly. We'll be a pretty free-flowing conversation, but I can promise that we'll at least cover those. So with that, we're talking about the most valuable skills for a data job. Maybe it might be good to kind of ground the conversation in just the general state of data jobs right now, because I know you two have done a lot of work researching job openings, and you've got a lot of really interesting content that you've been able to pull together on that. So maybe, Luke, would you mind starting us off just kind of like, what is the data market like right now? We're September 2024. A lot of things have happened over the past couple of years. Where are things now, and where do you think it's headed?
Yeah, I get real quick before we get into that one. With Kelly's point down there, I don't know if people know, me and Kelly actually worked together on building courses. And I'll shout out to her LinkedIn because that's how I actually found her, which goes into your actual question of the job market and how to actually get a job. I think LinkedIn's great for that, and we'll get to that eventually. But as far as the job market itself, definitely. So I started going hardcore into looking into the data itself, especially near the pandemic, and then after the pandemic. And obviously during the pandemic, there was a very large, high unemployment rate, especially in America. And then from there, with the stimulus and everything like that, it went back up, and it seemed like it was actually pretty easy, especially that period, 2021 to 2023, on landing a job and the ease of it. I would say it's definitely, it's not impossible right now. It's definitely doable. I haven't been fully invested in, like, obviously job searching or anything like that, but from what I've heard from others and looking at the data, it looks like it's definitely a little bit harder than after the pandemic, but it has. But I think it's still possible, and there's such a growing need still.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kelly, you were probably on the job market more recently. What was your experience in the job market like last time you were searching? Like, what did it feel really robust, like lots of opportunities, or did it feel really tight?
For me, it felt tight mostly because I didn't have any previous experience as a data analyst. So my latest job title when I was job searching was paralegal. All right, next pile, why is she applying? So for me, it was pretty rough. It took me about 8 months of full-time applying to actually land a job. So it didn't feel very robust then, but I did get
Yeah.
interviews, but I hear it's
And
tougher than it was
and
back
when
then.
was that? Refresh my memory, Kelly. When was that?
So that was my job search was in October of 2022 to about June of 2023. That's when I got
Yep.
my offer.
Yeah. And that's probably that period Luke was describing as is starting to tighten up kind of after all that stuff. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I'd love to talk a little bit more about the that job opportunity project that you guys put together. And I think there's a link there. It's at datanerd.tech. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was
If
there's a sort of a brainchild that started a few years ago. Mainly was looking into, I noticed I was making videos around, these are the top skills of data analysts. And then I'm like, wait, what? How do, like, I'm a data analyst. I need to provide some data about this. I can't be just saying these are the top skills without a data source or a data reference.
Yep.
So I worked to basically build sort of a bot to collect these data jobs from around the world, United States and different countries around the world, and then aggregate it into a database. And then Kelly and I actually now go through that, and then we'll make that part of the course of not only are you doing learning Excel, but you're also exploring how important is Excel in the data job market for like data scientists, data analysts, and data engineers. And yeah, so the resource is completely available for free at datanerd.tech. You can go in there. It tells you percentages. You can fine tune down based on job title and country. And it's really been an eyesight to me or insight to me of what should be focusing on most. And specifically for data analyst, SQL just is like hands down number one skill, and then followed by Excel in close second. So it's yeah. I guess any other question?
Yeah, no, I was playing around with it a little bit. It's amazing. I love that you have it filterable by country and then filterable by job title. I'm curious, like, are there any crazy insights that you found? Like, for example, maybe for analysts, there's a certain thing that's really important, but then something else becomes more important later on, or is it fairly consistent, like across levels and across geographies?
Yeah, so the geographies things are geography really does play a sort of a key role within it, but it comes down to, especially so sticking to data analysts specifically.
Yep.
SQL is going to be hands down across all geographies, like the top. But then whenever it comes to other geographies, other countries, things like programming languages and viz tools can differ depending on what country you're talking about. So something like Power BI and Tableau could be high in France, and then where we go to something like Britain, and then it's like programming languages are higher, Python. But definitely no major insights from like junior to senior roles, as far as like it seems like a lot of the skills are still the same.
Yep.
But the difference between something that I just discovered recently, the difference between something like a data analyst to data scientists and data engineers, there are a few things that overlap, specifically SQL. Once
Yep.
again, it's like if you don't know SQL for in the data community, it's like you need to learn SQL. But as far as the core technologies for each one of those of data analysts, data engineers, data scientists, they vary, I mean, pretty greatly. And specifically data engineers, shout out to them because they are required to know so many different skills.
Yeah.
And me and Kelly just found recently that they're not getting paid as much as like data scientists and data engineers or data analysts based on how many skills they need to actually know. So I mean, obviously, I'm a shout out to, hey, you should be a data analyst, but like data engineers, it's like a little bit scary about how many technologies you need to learn to jump into that field.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just playing with it a little bit and seeing exactly what you're saying, that it looks like SQL is across data analysts, data scientists, data engineers, and then, data scientists kind of skew Python is really important for them. And the data engineers, there's a whole bunch of cloud skills that are not super relevant to the analyst, but are in a lot of these jobs, like a lot of them, like AWS. So yeah, really, really interesting. I just think you guys have done such a good job putting this together and making it so easy to digest. Like, I think if anybody hasn't seen this, I would go to datanerds.tech and just check it out. In like a couple of minutes, you can really see what's important. So it sounds like, the skills you're seeing are like SQL, Excel, the Power BI, Python. Where would you guys start your learning journey? Like, say somebody was day one, they are trying to transition into that entry level data analyst role. That's a lot of the folks that will join us for the show here. What advice would you give to them about where to start? Kelly, maybe since you kind of did this pretty recently, I'd love to hear from you first.
Yeah, I think for me, I made mistakes when I did this, to be honest. I was like, let's learn all the things I need. I
Yeah,
would not
same.
recommend that.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us fall into that trap. We're like, let's buy
Uh-huh.
like 10 courses on like all these different skills and I'll be amazing and immediately like hireable. But I think it's better to stick with like a few skills and get really good at them.
Yeah.
One of them I always recommend, especially for my more like business focused friends who've asked me, I'm like, Excel, it's not, like sexy, it's not exciting, but honestly, so many stakeholders use it. And even if I make something brilliant, like a brilliant report, they'll go, can you export this to a CSV?
Yep.
They'll always ask that.
Mhm.
So Excel's a good one. And I obviously SQL, like Luke said, SQL, that's like, it has to be, it's a requirement on a lot of jobs. And I feel like it's an easier jump from Excel to SQL. And then obviously data viz tool. You could do a lot of data visualization in Excel. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's a good place just to start.
Yeah, it's good for
Mhm.
quick and dirty. Yeah, and the thing
Yeah.
that strikes me about those two is like you'd be hard pressed to find a company that doesn't use Excel and SQL, or
Right.
maybe they use Sheets. But
Right.
even if they're primarily Sheets, there's some people that are using Excel. It's ubiquitous in business, literally everywhere. So awesome, and I'm seeing tons of questions already in the questions tab. Thank you guys, that's fantastic. Gonna make for a good Q&A portion. So yeah, so I'm curious, if you were starting over right now and you didn't have those Excel skills, where would you turn? And like, are there certain things within Excel that you would want to learn first? Maybe Luke, let's go to you for this one.
Yeah. Honestly, if I was searching, I would be doing tandem of, so many people go into probably a silo and they're like, okay, I got to learn stuff, like hunker down, learn these skills. And I can relate very much to Kelly because I tried to learn Python first on like top of a web framework without knowing that much about
Yeah,
programming and about that. Oh my gosh, it
so
set me
hard.
back.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I guess with that question, I would, even though SQL is higher, I like Excel because you can play around with it. You can make some fun stuff with it, make some dashboards.
Yeah.
You can actually make the learning journey fun. SQL, it's number one, but it's also a little bit harder to wrap your head around of like, well, what's the importance of this right now? But I guess with that, I think if I would go back again, honestly, and I didn't know what I knew now, I would probably go to LinkedIn first and I would just start posting about my learning journey or what I'm
Yeah.
learning or what I'm doing and what I'm building. And I'd be focusing as much time on learning and communicating that through LinkedIn or even YouTube to others, because that one, it's going to feed into my learning. It's going to motivate me to keep learning. But two, it's going to help out with getting me out there. And I think that's probably even the more important thing, is you can sort of just like, sort of showcase your skills out there for others to see there.
Yeah. I think that's really good advice. And you mentioned that's how you got to know Kelly. Kelly, that's also how I got to know you too. So like you're somebody that I saw doing the exact thing that Luke is talking about. You were learning, you were sharing your learning journey. And it was fun to watch. It's like, it's an endearing thing. You want to root for people who are putting in the effort and wanting to get better at these things. I'm curious from you, Kelly, when you started doing that on LinkedIn, like, how did that go? Were you getting the sort of like feeling like you had to be committed to learning, like Luke is describing? Did you start to get opportunities? Like, did any of the day jobs you've had come out of that stuff? Like, give me all the good and the bad of starting your journey posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah, I think at the beginning when I started, I had to revamp it from like when I had it in college because I made it. I didn't use it for like 4 years.
Yep.
And then I was like, let's try posting, because I think I saw somewhere online, they're like, you should try posting somewhere. And I was going, okay, let's try. Absolutely no one read my posts. Like, I got nothing for like 6 months. So it was almost like I was writing to like it felt like there was a lot of weight to it, even though no one was actually looking. So it's kind of nice.
Yeah.
I put pressure on myself to learn, be like, oh, the audience is waiting for me. No one was waiting for me. No one would see it. But I felt accountable. Like it gave me accountability. And for job opportunities, once I started getting more traction, I'd say I got a lot of referrals from like I usually didn't ask. I would just like post and people were like, hey, what you're doing is cool. There's an opening at my company if you're interested. So ironically, at the job I have now, my LinkedIn made absolutely no difference. They looked at it and they just went, oh, that's cool. It was the blog I have that they actually liked more, to be honest.
Very, very interesting. Yeah. It's so interesting that you talk about like at the beginning, nobody saw the posts because I started LinkedIn, a few years ago when we were trying to get Maven off the ground and we thought it might be a good place to build community and talk to potential students. And I was like super uncomfortable about it at first too. I was like, this is weird. I've never done this. I don't really do the Instagram, Facebook thing myself. So I felt super weird. And what I found is the LinkedIn community is so nice. There's very rarely do you get slammed and somebody tells you you're dumb or anything like that. Like it's generally pretty encouraging in the data community. And the other piece that you mentioned, the post not getting seen, I sort of at first I was like, oh, what if it doesn't work? And it's like, okay, cool. If 100 people see this thing, like really, it's not that embarrassing on a big scale, And then if you do something that is really good and it goes really wide, that's because people like it in general, and you get a lot of people that are happy and you've helped them, and they're generally like have a lot of gratitude towards you. So it's like your wins are big and your embarrassment is very small. So it's really not that embarrassing. And that was probably the most surprising thing to me as somebody who was like totally petrified of doing it at first.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, super interesting. And Luke, did you start doing LinkedIn first or YouTube first? Because I know you're pretty big on both sides.
Well, YouTube. I mean, I was on. Yeah, YouTube first was the main one for me, and then it wasn't until after actually I had my data analyst job that I even realized about like, oh, the power of LinkedIn. So that's why go back, I would do it again. Not learn Python. I would focus on Excel, and then also post with LinkedIn, and then going back out. So
yeah, kind of.
And I guess to add to your last point, John, about the, I think also, obviously all three of us have a pretty big following now, but people may not understand the context. Like we did have to start from somewhere, like you were hinting to, like at the beginning, and nobody there. And even that, I think, people are like, oh, I'm too small. Employers aren't going to notice me. I would say, they still have recruiters going through and like using keyword searches, trying to find, some sort of specialized skill, whatever it is in an industry or whatever. Your following necessarily doesn't need to like impact that. So I wouldn't, put too much weight on that aspect. Like still put yourself out there. It's going to pay off.
Yeah, totally. And it's interesting, Kelly, you said, it was your blog that really did it, but I still guarantee they looked at your LinkedIn, and they, and it checked the box and they go, oh, cool. She talks about data a lot. This makes sense. Like if you talked about sales and driving enterprise relationships all the time, they'd be like, this doesn't really work, so it at least you looked like a data person and they said, yep, cool. So it's no matter what, it's going to be a check the box, make sure she's not a total crazy person or a jerk on social media, stuff like that. So it matters, I think, no matter what. Another one that I'd love to just talk about a little more. You guys, so Python, it ranks pretty high on a number of the different jobs. You're saying don't start with Python first. I completely agree. So I'd love to just like double click into the reasoning there a little bit more for folks that probably are hearing like, hey, Python's so important, but then like, hey, these three people who are data analysts are saying like, yeah, it's important, but like definitely don't start there because that's the worst path. Either you have pretty strong opinions. I know, Luke, you mentioned it.
Kelly, you have anything on that?
I feel like my take's going to be different because in college, I actually took computer science classes and I had been programming for a while. I started with like websites, JavaScript, moved on to C++, learned some R for mathematical modeling. So actually Python wasn't too bad for me. So I don't feel like I'm a good case study. I was like, oh, it's kind of hard, but I was like, I found C++ harder.
Yeah, and I can, well, I didn't come from a computer science background, so I wasn't as fortunate as Kelly. But I, I noticed that, especially to your point, John, so many people, you go on there whenever I was looking for a look at the data, and so many people are, shoving down Python down your throat. And also it's so popular in things like data scientists and data engineers. And, I still stick with it to today. Like, you need to just focus on, get the small wins. Like, you can learn SQL in a weekend. Python is going to take. I'm doing Python for 5 or 10 years now, and I'm still learning stuff today. Kelly and I are going back using Python with building our courses, and like we're learning stuff all the time about it. Whereas I'm not saying that as much about something like SQL or Excel, because you can get down those foundational skills so quick, and then you can provide value. And I think the most important thing is that people don't understand is a lot of the stuff that you can do in, well, Excel and SQL, the main data analytics stuff. Yeah, you can do it in Python, but it's a little bit harder to learn to do. And so don't think you're necessarily not unlocking something. Like, I know some hardcore Excel users that can do a lot more impressive things than I can do with Python alone. So don't think not knowing a tool is limiting you in your ability to analyze data in a certain way.
Yeah, it seems like it's a lot more to learn, right? Like with Excel, you're not really learning a language. It's point and click. It's like there's some logic, which is a good way to practice with logic. It's a good way to practice with tables and rows and columns, that kind of concept. But I always think if you've spent some time trying to do data work with Excel, that makes learning SQL a lot easier. And SQL's, as far as a language goes, SQL's probably like the least intimidating language. It's basically like saying the things that you're trying to do, select these columns from this table, and you literally are typing select and from. It's I'm definitely not a programmer. Same things, had to learn SQL with a book before there were all these good YouTube channels and online courses a long time ago. And if I could do it, I guarantee everybody on this call could do it, because I was not Kelly in college with a computer science background either. So
yeah.
Awesome.
No,
Yeah.
a funny point with that Kelly and I have found out recently is like with the rise of like chatbots and ChatGPT and Gemini and all that kind of stuff. So like, right, if we have a complex SQL query, we can just like throw it into those chatbots and stuff. And it can provide you the SQL and Python. And so there's a lot of good benefits of that. But I think one of the things that we found out recently is it's not so good at Excel. And so knowing that Excel skill and actually be able to do it without the help of a bot is actually, I think, going to be a sort of a needed skill in the future. Whereas something like SQL, Python, you can easily just go into a bot, tell it, hey, I want to query this table for this attribute. It's going to write the query and have it for you. Whereas doing it in Excel, it's going to be a little bit harder for you.
Yeah. I'm curious to jump into that one a little bit more too. How much do you guys like using tools like a ChatGPT or another LLM for query writing in SQL, or sounds like Excel, probably not so much. Do you find it helpful in SQL? Are you correcting mistakes from it too much? Like, where do you guys think it is now, and where would it go in the future? Kelly, maybe start with you. Are you using ChatGPT and other stuff right now?
I do sometimes, but I've noticed for SQL, if I give it something general, like, oh, I'd like to join this table and I need like a rolling average, it would just give me some syntax to start off with. But I found the hard part is because it doesn't understand the relationship between the tables at my company, and I don't give it that information, it really struggles, or sometimes the business context is just lost, and the bot will go, oh, it should be calculated this way. And I'm like, well, absolutely not. That's not how it's calculated at the company. So that's the hard part I find, is applying specific scenarios, what I do at work, to that. So it's like a good starting off point for SQL specifically, but I don't really use it as much to like edit a whole query anymore. Like, it doesn't really help. For Python, I feel like it's a lot better. Sometimes I just go, can you just build this visualization or help me code and change this. So I use it, not as much though.
Yeah, cool. How about you, Luke? Are you a big fan or not so much or somewhere in the middle?
No, I love it. And to Kelly's point, I guess she just showed the value right there of why you still are going to need, like, it's like, oh, data analysts are going to replace that business context, like being able
Yeah.
to explain, like, no, this is not what the stakeholder wants. Like, we need to like look at it from this direction. Because you can't feed, I mean, maybe one day, like down the road in a few years, whenever they have large enough context windows, but it's going to take some type of person on the ground that's, familiar with the data to tell the bot, okay, I want to guide it this way.
Yeah.
But I guess to your question, yeah, I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of using it to automate my workflow and help me along the way. Like specifically now with anytime I'm coding in something like Python, I'm using Cursor right now, which is sort of like a spin-off VS Code. Anyway, it has a chatbot inside of it, and I'm using mostly text I understand how to read the code, but I can work so much quicker just like highlighting something, be like, okay, hey, I want to do this. It'll read everything and reformat it. So I think it's great at Python and helping out with SQL. But really, if it doesn't have that business context, it can go off the rails.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right. There's some, and I think one of the biggest things to me is there's some core foundational skills that the two of you have that allows you to use it effectively, right? But you couldn't, like, I couldn't give my mom ChatGPT and say, "Hey, mom, go do some SQL stuff with these tables." She'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
Yes,
it's not gonna happen. Yeah, yeah.
I'm
So
curious, are you using AI tools pretty frequently, or?
I will sometimes. I'm probably more in Kelly's camp. So my bread and butter is SQL, and I've kind of found like I generally will have to correct it. Sometimes what I'll use it for is syntax, like I would use Google for in the past. So if like it's funny, I teach SQL courses and I sometimes look up the syntax that is in my courses in Google. So like anybody who thinks you have to memorize every single piece of the universal standard, like you definitely do not. I'm like over a decade in and still forgetting the specifics of it and the nuances between MySQL and T-SQL that I gotta pop it in there. So that's sort of where I've used it. But I've kind of found like right now I end up correcting it more and it will give code and that code may run or might not, but it might run and it might not really give me the answer that I'm looking for. So I've kind of found like I'm kind of correcting it too much that it's not helping. I know it's a little different maybe on the software engineering side. Folks are thinking it's really speeding them up. I think it's going to get better though. Like it's already gotten good so fast. So I do think people should, like if you're young, you should learn to use it. But I would prioritize the foundational skills first and don't just think like, oh, I don't have to know about table structures and relationships because there's this ChatGPT thing now. I think that would be like really bad advice. But yeah, someday it might like do all the grunt work, which would be kind of cool. But right now it's like, I still got to do it, No,
and I think that's a great point that people need to still, that are especially those beginning the learning journey. I think back to school, right? Sometimes you take tests and you have to like memorize all this stuff. And it's like, in real life, I'm going to have a book or I'm going to have the internet to actually research this. Why do I have to memorize this now? But then whenever you go back, like it's like, oh, okay, I did that so I can understand the basics and the concepts. And now like using something like a chatbot or AI, like it just helps with it.
Yeah.
But that's interesting that both you and Kelly, it seems like it's more of an inhibitor sometimes especially with SQL from which you're working from. I don't work as much in SQL, so I work more in Python. So that's why I'm seeing differences.
Yeah, and ask me again in 18 months. Like these things are moving so fast that it might be a totally different answer. So you guys said Excel is the place to start. I totally agree with it. Least intimidating. You can start to build those muscles. You can solve real data problems. When I went to the course site, I did not see an Excel course from you guys. But then I noticed coming soon that there is an Excel course. Can you talk? How soon is that coming? And I'd love to hear like what's in it too, because I think sort of the structure of it is probably a good framework for folks, whether they're interested in the course or just kind of learning on their own. That you guys have, I'm sure you've thought about the structure. So yeah, when does that come in and what's in there?
Yeah. So that'll be Kelly and I've been, oh my goodness, we've been working our butts off for what, like 3.5 months now on this thing.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
And so hopefully I think it's going to be out next month, sometime. Kelly's got a vacation she's got to get to, so we got to get this done. Um, but it's turned out to be a little bit more difficult. As easy it is, I say, to learn Excel, to make a course and to go over the concept, because there's so many different things you can go into with Excel, new features being added, Python in Excel, Copilot, VBA, stuff like that. Anyway, we went through and decided what we were going to go over, and so we normally our courses are divided into like a beginner section and advanced. So the beginner section is going to be focused on how to make charts, how to do formulas, how to those main things, formulas and charts, and making like a dashboard in like the beginner section. And then the advanced section, something that I found whenever I was working as a data analyst that I used intensely, shifts into things like Power Query to perform extraction, transformations, and loading of data, ETL, and then Power Pivot, actually data modeling and creating relationships, and then also going into DAX. So much more advanced stuff that behind the spreadsheets itself. So that's what I guess key focus areas. Kelly, anything to add to that or anything I missed?
No, I think you covered most of it. My head is just like in the weeds trying to finish up the course before this vacation.
How about pivot tables, like just basic pivot tables? Is that beginner?
We put that in the advanced section, right after the beginner section, right into advanced. Mainly just so you can get it familiar. Because I just think back whenever I started with Excel, I worked with Excel for so long and I was just using formulas for everything. And I would build pivot tables. I would basically build pivot tables with formulas. And because I sort of did that that method of learning, and it really helps me now in understanding how to manipulate a spreadsheet by relying just specifically on pivot tables. So we shifted to advanced section.
Awesome. Yeah, that sounds really good. Yeah, I think that's perfect. Definitely formulas is a great foundation, and it's like you feel like you're doing sort of that coding light, you're using some logic, and you can solve a lot of problems that way. And then charts and graphs, I just think that's so powerful. So for me personally, I use SQL to get most of my data out of the business, and then I'm usually sticking it into Excel, and that's how I tell my story. Or even for myself, that's how I look at the data with some charts, so I can make some decisions based on it. So I think starting with formulas and charts is fantastic, and then getting into pivot tables and all the complex stuff where you're really almost kind of starting to use Excel as a database a little bit.
Right.
with Power Query is that sounds really smart. Awesome. Really, really cool. Well, so we've got a ton of people here, and we've got a whole bunch of questions. I'd love to shift into Q&A now. We've got a good question from Umair. And so Umair says, what are the top 5 interview questions that Kelly and Luke would ask someone if they were to hire someone with entry-level experience? And let's say data analyst, because I think a lot of the folks on this call and in the Maven audience are thinking data analyst versus data scientist and data engineer. Kelly, how about you? You've been interviewing more recently. What would be like your first question you would put to somebody entry-level analyst?
Well, I've been interviewed, but I've never actually done interviews for someone for a data position. So I can just think of questions that people have asked me. It's usually something along the lines of, besides the tools, a lot of times they ask like experience or when have you actually used data to drive some sort of decision? Not necessarily like it has to be really complex, like when did you use Python? But when did you actually look at data and then go, okay, like what did you do with that data? That's one that I was asked a lot, especially for those entry level, because they kind of knew I didn't really have the professional background as a data analyst, so they just ask kind of general questions.
Trying to understand the projects and
Yeah.
like kind of the different things. Yeah. How about you, Luke? What would be high on your list if you were grilling a potential candidate for entry-level analyst?
Yeah, mine sort of goes with a little bit along the lines of Kelly, but mainly I'm always curious to find what was like a valuable insight. Like, it's so great that you can use this SQL or this Excel tool, but really we're not going to sit down in an interview and talk about like, how to use some if and how to make a pivot chart or whatever. Mainly I want to find out like what like you did at the beginning of this. What are great insights that you found from doing your job analysis? That's really what I'm going to be finding. And I want to talk to somebody about what they're passionate about, and to see that passion come out and how they used a tool in order to analyze or find insights in it. So that way I can even find out if they're even interested in like analyzing data. So that's why I always recommend with any type of project, make sure you're doing something about that you're interested in, like the Contazo data set. It's great to like, there's a generic data set on like a store data set. It's out there for free on the internet if people want to use it. But anyway, there's not a lot of like personal like motivation for somebody to want to actually dive into this Contazo data set. So anytime you can have like a personal relationship with what you're going into and explaining a story of how you found something, love that.
Awesome. Yeah. And it's I think both of you guys there's a piece in there that like when you're answering the question, you're trying to not just talk about the data skills, but you're also showing off like how I understand a business, what I might be excited about doing for a business, how I generally communicate. So like the interviewer may ask one question, but they're thinking about a few different dimensions, at least subconsciously. Like for example, we're chatting here today. As we're talking about your projects and your experience, it's a comfortable conversation. I'm saying, hey, if these people were potentially getting hired, that they'd be fun to work with. I'd enjoy that, right?
Yes.
And that's really important. And like they're getting their point across clearly. That's really important too. Versus like if this were really painful, like a painful interview is it's usually not going to have a great outcome.
No.
So just think about that. Yeah, I think really good advice.
No, those are such great points about like, they're sort of interviewing you also, like they're interviewing you to become a potential friend. So can you relate to that? That's why I'm like, go back to this, like have projects that you have something you're passionate about. So when you're in this interview, it just comes natural and you don't have to fake it because you're already going to be under pressure already being in this interview.
Yeah. I love it. Here's another one. This one's from Nobeko. In a time of layoffs and churn resulting in competing with better experienced candidates, are there other adjacent paths that one can take to at least get recent entries on the resume to shrink the gap? So like if somebody is kind of having a hard time getting that data analyst role, are there any other roles you guys would recommend targeting? That's a really interesting strategy.
Yeah, I think when I was job searching, I was like, I'm going to be a data analyst. That is the exact title I'm searching for. I didn't get a lot of feedback, embarrassingly. So eventually I was just like, okay, let's just type in the word analyst and then see what pops up. Because I noticed sometimes jobs just aren't titled data analyst, but they use a lot of the skills. Or sometimes it is a data analyst, but then it doesn't use anything that you're interested in. So you have to business analyst or analyst specialist, or it was a bunch of, I'm not saying strange, but it was kind of weird names I would look for. That's full time. For like the gap, what I did was I also got like a part-time job. It was more marketing, but I still used data and got insights for that. So that's another thing that I did personally to help. Like I'm still working towards it, like a full-time role, but here's what I'm doing in the meantime.
Yeah, I like two great pieces of advice there. Not all data analyst roles are titled data analysts. You might find product analysts, marketing analysts, operations, and all that stuff. So like, don't just search data analyst. And I love the side door strategy of, hey, I'm not in an analyst role, but guess what? I'm going to do data analyst work. I'm going to build those skills and I'm going to come up with stories that I can share somebody. Like that's such a strong move. I love that you are sharing that with folks because I've seen, that wasn't my path personally, but I've seen a couple people at companies I've been at do that. There were different roles and then they just started doing stuff with data to help their specific department. It might be customer service or marketing. And then people are like, wow, that guy, that girl, they're good at this stuff. Like, let's get them doing this full time.
Mhm.
And it's a great story. So yeah, really, really cool. Luke, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, Kelly had I think the greatest points. She stole them all. Um, to that point, I think so many companies, to both Kelly and John's, both y'all's point, so many companies don't realize they need data analysts, and so they have these roles or something. Because I mean, even whenever I started working for a chemical company, I wasn't necessarily I wasn't hired as a data analyst, but they needed a data analyst, and so I started just fulfilling that role. So yes, I would recommend that option. And then the third one that I'd throw out there is freelance or side jobs, side works, putting it out there, like using something like Upwork or Fiverr to find side jobs potentially. I think that is potentially an undervalued thing too. If you can't land like any type of full-time job that's meaning anything, just doing stuff on the side, making projects, building a portfolio, and be able to showcase, hey, I worked on this real world project, and is a sort of like a third option.
Awesome. I love it. That's yeah, really, really solid advice here. There's another question. I love this question from Jean-Claude because it's tactical and practical. And I have a feeling there's a lot of people in the audience that are very curious about the same one. So if I'm new to the profession and I'm trying to learn the skills, how do you practice them without having the tools? So Jean-Claude's saying, maybe doesn't have Power BI or SQL yet on their machine, maybe doesn't have access to the databases. What advice would you give somebody who feels like that's a barrier for them right now?
Sorry, I'm thinking. One, I don't know if this is a good way, but what I did was for the SQL specifically, I didn't have any database. There's a few ones online, like BigQuery has their own database, but it's like so general. I was like, it's good for learning, but to actually dive in, what I did was I created my own database. I think that's a bit extra, to be honest, but that's what I did. For one of my projects, I had weightlifting data, so I made my own tables, and then I figured out how to join them. And so that's one way I practiced. That's
awesome.
It's a lot of extra work, but if you really want to go for it, that's a suggestion.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I think I'm going to steal Kelly's answer as well with this one, making your own data set. But I guess to the point, so people, I've been in so many different roles that I was needed to get data to do my job that wasn't available. And so I get to Kelly's point, like even though she had to like go make up her own data set or whatever, you may have to do this in your real job. And so if you don't have access to maybe something, can you make it? Can you use something that's very similar instead? That would be my recommendation. I guess that's more of what the question is asking about, because I think SQL is free, Power BI is free. You can get it onto your computer. I think it's more of like, where's the data at? No company is going to be like, you haven't, they probably want some experience with it, but if you've gone out your way to try to like extract and get some data online and then use that, I think they're going to be blown away by that and be like, oh my gosh, imagine the potential we could use for this candidate, being that they did this on their own accord.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love the idea of creating the data sets, and Luke, you touched on a thing that I'll drill into myself, that SQL's free, Power BI is free, because like people on this call might not know all those details. So for example, if you want to use SQL, like I personally love MySQL, go to mysql.com, dev.mysql.com, I think it's the dev site, and you can download community server and run that on your machine locally. You don't have to have any cloud and pay for it. And you can download MySQL Workbench, and you can use those together. And like you could do what Kelly did, what Luke's talking about, upload some data set, call that your database. Like that's a great place to start. Same thing with Power BI.
Mm-hmm.
Power BI desktop you can install for free on your machine. So yeah, I think that kind of may surprise people. They may think, oh, these are enterprise things they're big companies, but they actually, all of them very strategically allow learners to get access to them for free, at least the basic stuff. And then there's some things that you do need enterprise license for, like using Power BI in the cloud, but you could still practice. You could do so much on your desktop. And so I think, so Do not let
Yeah.
that be a barrier. Yeah.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the 6 top tools of data analysts, so SQL, Excel, Python, R, Power BI, and Tableau, everything has a version that you can get for free.
Yeah.
Tableau, yes, you have to pay for a license for something, but they have free versions of it. Excel, they have paid versions, but you can get the free version and do the basics of it. So,
Yep. Yeah. So definitely don't let that be a barrier. Really, really good advice there. This one's from Viviana, specifically for Kelly. So Kelly, you mentioned applying business knowledge to analytics. Could you share an example where understanding the business context made all the difference for you in delivering a successful data solution? That's a great one to make it a little concrete for folks.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of specific example. I think when I first started out, I understood basically the basics of like SQL, like you can join the tables. And when I would run it, I would go, okay, I ran this query, let's say to get like purchases, like basically just to get revenue, basically. And I was like, okay, this looks great. And I aggregated the data. I was like, no errors. And then I looked at the numbers and I went, wait a minute. I know the business, as in I know what our daily revenue looks like because I've been looking at it. And this number is inflated for some reason. Even though the SQL returned no errors, it's technically right. Knowing the business, I was like, oh, this number's inflated. Actually, our average should be this when it's this. And then I looked at it, it was like duplicating things, or the aggregation wasn't right, or I used the wrong time zone. So things like that, I've just noticed little things help a lot. Just understanding generally like KPIs, what KPIs are important, what definitions you have in your business. So for us at a gaming company, understanding how coins come in, because it's like a casino, coins come in and coins come out. Understanding how that works is very important for understanding how revenue is generated. So things like that, I've just gained over time. But just like those little things, even if you feel like, oh, I don't know enough about business, just knowing this number's inflated, or just taking a critical look at whatever it gives back at you and going, hold on, let me just not take it at face value. Let me just look at it based on what I know.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. Translating that, your understanding of the business to what it would look like in your data is like one of the most critical things that that folks need to do in the role. I love that example. Here we've got time for a few more. Here's one from Jeremiah. So as an interviewer or a data, I think, hiring manager, what key aspects should we highlight in a CV or a resume when transitioning into an entry-level role? How can we structure it to pass HR keyword filters? So talking maybe about the ATS, the applicant tracking systems, and secure an interview, especially with minimal direct experience in the field. So yeah, interesting. Any resume hacks or hot tips?
I would throw in, I mean, obviously I'm very big on AI tools. But if you're not, so these, he brings up a good point about, hey, now HR usually has some sort of bot going through and checking to see if your resume has these keywords that you're meeting. So why not, use the same tools and try to compete with them? Have a base resume and then paste your resume into ChatGPT along with, the job posting itself and be like, hey, how could I reword this? What areas can I reword? Where do I need to include keywords that are in the job description into my resume? And bam, it can help you out because you already have this work, and it now you're going to increase your chances of getting picked up by their bot because you use your own bot.
Yep. Yeah, really smart. Really smart. Kelly, anything to add on resumes?
Honestly, I feel like my resume writing isn't the best, but I kind of did what Luke did. Was I had a base resume of what I did, and then I would literally just post into the, like what he said, job description, my resume.
Yeah.
I will say always read what it spits out at you, because sometimes ChatGPT sounds unnatural.
Yes.
And if you just paste it in, the hiring manager is going to go, okay, what is this? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So just like give it a read through if you do that.
Yes.
But I helped it did insert, like, if I use Looker, or and the job description says something about Looker, it like really that, but it always needs the human read through right now.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, it's funny, Kelly, how when you have such a good LinkedIn game like you do, you don't worry as much about your resume. You're in great shape, which is
you say that.
a nice problem to have. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. And so I think the key nugget in there that I loved from both you guys, and you're talking about using technology to do this, but really it's like making sure you're using the same language in your resume that they're putting in the job post. And, you can see that. You can see the tools they're talking about. You could see the types of problems that they're looking for you to solve in the job post. So yeah, whether you're doing it with ChatGPT or just kind of eyeballing it yourself, I think that's the key thing. So I think that's the perfect advice. And I'll say a little plug for a previous show and our friend Albert Bellamy. He was on a couple of weeks ago. Al's awesome. He is all about resumes. He also has his own service. If you wanted like from somebody who's a data pro, got a ton of leadership experience. He from a military background. He helps people one-on-one. So if you have a need for that and are interested, he can do that. And if you just want more free content that's really on resumes, he was on the show for like an hour talking about resumes, and his advice was really, really good. So check that out at mavensofdata.com. Let's see a couple of things here. This is an interesting one, and this one kind of comes up a lot too. So this is from Pearl, and so Pearl says, I have a Microsoft certification in Power BI, and I built a portfolio. Good starts there. But I still have a hard time landing a job in the data analytics field. Most job descriptions ask for 3+ years, even for entry level. We hear that all the time. And you guys are both like shaking your head and looking disgusted. What are your thoughts on that?
I think for me, what I would do is, I noticed that too when I was job searching. They're like entry level, and I'm putting quotations because they're like, we require 3+ years. And you're going, entry level, who is she here? So what I basically did was I said, you know what? I'm going to apply anyways. And actually for quite a few of the jobs, I got interviewed for them, even though they were entry level. Sometimes what I've noticed is skills is arbitrary. As long as the job description, when I was reading it, I was like, I can do this. Obviously, when I was looking, anything like senior, like really high level, I was like, that's a bit of a stretch. But if it asks for 1 to 3 years, I would just apply, to be honest. I don't know if that's good or bad, but that's basically what I did. Was I applied anyways, and then threw my hat in and said, you know what, you say entry level, I'm going to try.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I get so yeah, I'm with completely with Kelly, like the whole entry level and 3+ years of experience. But I would also argue sometimes they're not looking necessarily for 3+ years of work experience, right? It's like experience with using the tool. And so I would argue that, if you've been learning it for a while, been using it, been applying it in project, how much time could you apply to that? So yeah, unfortunately, there's so many companies out there that will do this. And it's just like, guys, you can't say this is a mid-level job now. This is somebody after their first year or first job going over. So don't get discouraged. I would be more like, for me, it's more like, okay, there's a company that doesn't know what they're doing. I may not want to work for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And like, at least they are having a hard time writing a job description, at minimum. And I find that a lot. Like a lot of these seem like they don't make sense. They seem much more like a wish list, and totally on the same page. And I love, Kelly, I love that you were just shooting your shot. And I love that you told the audience you got interviews, So I think that's the thing. Don't filter yourself out. Shoot your shot. If you feel like you could do the work, that's really what matters. Companies are terrible at writing job descriptions. I've been in that boat myself. I've done a bad job on it, I guarantee. So it's fantastic advice. Well, guys, we are at time. Luke, Kelly, you have been amazing. Thank you guys so much. I guarantee the audience has a ton to chew on. We gave them some great resources. You guys saw where you can get more from Luke and Kelly. Go to LinkedIn, go to YouTube, check out datanerd.tech. If you don't believe us, the data's right there. And thank you guys so much. And thank you to the audience for doing this. This was fantastic.